present.
Ms. Nichols,
Here.
Mr. Martelli,
Here.
you have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's stand up for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
of the United States of America, for the
to the
republic
which it
which
stands,
stands
one nation,
Under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty,
with
and
liberty,
justice for all.
I find myself trying to time myself with you, Renee.
hard.
I'm a fast talker, so I've been trying to do a better job at like slowing it down a little bit.
I hear you.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining in on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Our agenda for today, again, we'll discuss some of the potential options moving forward for Colliers. I want to recognize what was discussed at the last bigger committee meeting where, yeah, the options outside of 1 and 2 were also encouraged by the larger committee. So I want this group to discuss that tonight and see how this subcommittee can steer the overall discussions in the right manner, and also expand the options that we're looking at in a way. Hello? And also expand the options we're looking at in a way that makes, while keeping the process efficient. So,
All right, selected.
I think Jeff is coming in and out.
Hang on, let me put the phone down.
We could hear Jeff. Now,
I can't hear Jeff.
Now,
Jeff,
can you hear
speak.
me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
I can hear you. You're Mike Woods. I'm gonna hang up the phone now.
All right, thank you.
Now I hear him.
You're good.
All right.
Sorry about that. We're all set.
Does anybody say anything?
Not yet. We were just doing a little intro here. So here's what I think. How do we include, I think is going to be our next goal here. How do we include the high school options as part of the decision-making process? And understanding the challenges, the fiscal challenge of said options. How do we include it amongst the options that we're going to put a lot of energy on? My fear is that we have a lot of balls up in the air and we can only handle so many. So I think the goal of this subcommittee is just that, to try to steer the consultant in the right direction. But you know, I follow the minutes of the meeting last time, and I think the sentiment I got was that the whole group wanted a broader view of the options. But Sylvia and Andrew, I don't know if you got that same sentiment being present at said meeting.
Can I comment, Renee?
Yes, please.
Okay. My biggest concern is in conversations with the council, and council was there, and they were very appreciative of being included, and they were very interested in the options that were being presented. Their concern, and I can't speak for everybody, but the general kind of feeling in the conversation was, we really, really have to be careful of the cost here, because the cost is going to be the driver for this. And I can tell you that there are some members on the council that will not vote for anything if it is an outlandish price, what they feel is an outlandish price tag. We must show them that whatever options we're making are fiscally responsible, and that we've looked at all the cost saving alternatives to give the best bang for our buck. And many of them feel, and perhaps it's because they haven't been to the meetings, perhaps a lot of them are following the meetings that we're having online, but they're just concerned at the price tags, and they're picturing a long-term plan of $200 million, and that is not going to fly with them, I don't think. Now, that's not everybody, but that's a certain percentage. And in order to get a council approval, you have to get a majority vote on the council. So they are not discounting the fact that we need to do something, and they're all in for trying to make sure we do a good job. But I think when they hear big proposals like a new high school or $100 and something million, you lose them right there. So that's
Right.
just from the council's perspective, from just informal conversations that I've had with several of the members. I don't know about you, Andrew. I don't know. where
Right.
you-
So yeah, I could echo the same. I've been contacted by 2 members of the town council since our last meeting, and their fear is that the $75 million number keeps getting put out there. I don't know if that's our number or not our number, but that's been the number. And the question that I got was, if we go ahead with the new middle school proposal, so that means that we're not touching any of the elementary schools. We're not touching Cheshire High School. We're not doing any other work. So I had a discussion with one of the council members last evening, and they were saying to me, well, why aren't we looking at a renovation plan for all of the elementary schools if we're going to be spending $75 million? Why can't we do additions and renovations to the elementary schools and at least be able to touch all of the school buildings there, and then talk about the middle school and the high school in future phases of the plan? So I think we need to kind of meet somewhere in the middle there, or we're not going to get a project forwarded to referendum. And I think that all of these hours spent, it's going to be a shame.
Yeah.
Not having a project. And, Cheshire High School, we all know work needs to be done there, but maybe that's in our 20-year plan. And
Right.
then we could actually direct Vin through the capital budget for incremental renovations to Cheshire High School until we're able to do the larger project there. So that's my 2 cents.
No, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sylvia. And I think I share the same concerns. Like when in my family, when we go out buy a house, we have a budget, and I think the town has a budget as well. And that budget is clearly not 100. That budget is clearly not 150, which is about what the high school will be. And whether it might be 75 or less than that, I think that's probably around the number. So I don't want to go down a path where we are exploring this $150 million project and spending a lot of energy on that, where we could be spending the energy on projects that are more realistic and likely to succeed. My challenge here as a chair of this subcommittee is, how do we provide, or how we steer the consultant towards those options that in our collective opinion here make more sense. But then, at the larger committee, then we hear different opinions, but at some point we need to come to the reality that that's not going to fly. So I think, what do we need to, and that's what I want to come out with a plan today. What do we need to present to the larger committee? Is it a benefits matrix or a comparison matrix? What do we need to present to the larger team, the larger committee, so that we don't spend a lot of energy into those
Yeah.
out of budget options?
Renee, can I just jump in for a second?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, sorry about the technical issues, and I'm clearly not Mike Woods, but
It's
No
okay,
worry,
Mike.
Mr. Woods.
All right, Mike.
You know.
so if you don't like what I have to say, Mike Woods was a real jerk in the meeting. Anyway, so I want to say this respectfully, because I believe that the council, when they put out a figure, and I'm not sure, I wouldn't call it an arbitrary figure. I'm sure there's a number that's, it's connected back to something. We talked in the communications meeting earlier this week about a survey, and we've looked at a survey that Groton has done that helped assess the fiscal tolerance in the community for certain plans. Is there a sense amongst the council and board members that if they had would more information from the community about fiscal tolerance be prudent here? Because I think, for all of us that have been in this, some of us for years on end, when you look at saying, I'm going to put a number to it, $75 million, what can you get me for 75 million? I mean, we could put Band-Aids on it, but this is a really expensive Band-Aid. You put a lot of expensive Band-Aids on all these buildings. I'm not so sure that addresses the long-term, it just doesn't give me a lot of confidence. And I say that respectfully, meaning, and this is not my decision to make, but it's just my opinion. And I can't bite my tongue on this.
Can I respond to you, Jeff?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know if Renee was,
Oh, no,
keeping
please.
the gate
Go
here.
ahead.
I understand where you're coming from. I think that the council feels they're looking at the tax impact, looking at all the other projects that we have in the pipeline that are coming along for the next how many years this project will be. And I know that the consensus of the council is generally right now to be conservative. However, having said that, I think that there is I don't know that 75 million is the end all be all number, but I know that 150 is not. So I think if we could show them a fiscal plan, and maybe Chuck can speak to this because I'm sure he's worked with other communities who've had these kinds of issues before, to see how we can present a plan that maybe at the end of the 5 years or 8 years that we do this, we can embark on something a little more expensive. But the council is concerned about the ability of the taxpayers to add an additional significant tax burden in a time when we have no idea. Many of the other communities that we're compared to have a lot of higher grand lists. They've got a lot more commercial development, more industrial development that helps to pay taxes. In our town, the reality is that the majority of the taxpayers are residents. And what is the appetite? I have not taken the temperature of the council as to a survey, but I know that they would feel that it had to be done not necessarily by the communications committee, but perhaps by somebody so totally independent of Board of Education, SMC, and Town Council to generate a survey which is as non-skewed as possible, because that will be the question they will say is it's how the questions were answered. So I can't speak to them, but I think that's one option we could offer to them. But I agree with Renee that to spend a lot of time and energy of Colliers and us and everybody else on plans that are just not even going to begin to be acceptable is just, we're all frustrated. I get it, but so that's where I stand, and I will certainly survey the council in my daily thing. I think it's important that the chair of the SMC committee reach out to the chair of the council. This is a council committee that we're on. It was established by the council. And ultimately, it's the council that's going to approve the dollars. Now, we have no say really in the educational part of it, but it's the expenditures that we have the problem with. So
Right.
I think it might be helpful if the council chair and the chair of the SMC could sit down together and come up with maybe a more direct, rather than it coming from us as a committee or the communications committee or the visitation committee, if it came from the council chair to sit down and find a way to establish this, it might be more helpful. Don't know. Andrew, what did you hear from whoever you spoke to last evening? What kind of response did you get there?
Keep it under $75 million.
All right. And do you think there would be any
Well,
value in assessing the ability?
I think a couple things. I think that, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I think that this committee, the larger committee, the subcommittee, we could sit here and we can circular talk about all the different options, how these projects can go. If we're not either given a budget by the town council and by town government saying, okay, you have $75 million to spend in the next 10 years, and then we back into it, we are going to sit here and just continue to discuss and discuss and discuss.
Right.
And then there's also part of me saying, if there was a 20-year, 200, 250, whatever $100 million plan that there is, it might make sense to put out a survey like Jeff is saying to the entire community and say, hey, look, over the next 20 years, if we spend $250 million renovating the schools, building a new middle school, and ultimately building a new Cheshire High School, are you willing to pay an additional X amount of dollars based on current tax collection revenue, based on our, tax collection rate, based on the grand list? Because you might find that there's a lot of people in this community that are willing to spend an additional $100, $150 a year in their property taxes in order to have all new schools. So, and that's why I'm having such a hard time with this, because we don't know what the appetite is. We don't know what the bonding capacity is, like hard numbers yet from Jim Jaska. I wish that we could nail that down. And if we don't bond, this might be an unpopular thing to say, but if we just take a break on general capital bonding for a little while within the community, like road pavings and sidewalks and fire apparatus, and put all of that into education for 5-7 years, does that make sense? Because I know I voted for a lot of projects over the past 10 years that have not been heavy in schools.
That's true. I agree with that. But you also have to remember that there's a significant part of the community that is perhaps not using the school facilities and does use those other things that we
Need to improve.
devote capital dollars to. So I agree with you in that sense. And I agree, and this is I've been saying this right along, we need to come up with a number. And so nobody has been able to, this committee has not come out and said, we want this much to do this exact plan, nor has the council come back and said, we will only give you this much. So it seems to me that we've put the cart before the horse on the committee, and that the council should come to the committee with a financial plan that says this is how we can bond it over the years, and this will be the fiscal impact to the taxpayer. Maybe
Right.
we're all concerned that it's going to be a huge impact, and maybe it's $100. But if it's going to
Maybe
be
it's $100 a year and you divide it out over 12 mortgage payments, and then you look at that as the average taxpayer in town with a $360,000 house.
right,
Hey, look, it's worth $24 a month.
but maybe it's $800 a person, and
Right.
that, or $1,000 a person, and that adds $100 a month to that
Mhm.
cost. So, but we don't know that. I don't even know that as a council person now. So that's the question that we have to determine. And as a mother or a grandmother of kids in school, I'm okay with that. But it's also on my end of it as a grandmother, I don't want to have to spend another $200 a month on taxes for the next 10 years or 3 or 2 or however long I'm here. So I think you're right, Renee, and I agree with you, Andrew. Maybe we put the cart before the horse, and we need to have a hard number as to.
Yeah, but if you read between the lines, we've been doing this for over a year now, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's pretty clear that anything over 100, there's no appetite for it.
Right.
And every time we bring it up, it comes back as well, maybe these, but when you actually have serious conversations with the stakeholders, it's pretty clear that is the line. And whether that's 75 or 100, I'm not sure. I think it's somewhere in between. So are we going to get a hard number or not? I don't think so.
But why couldn't? I don't understand why we can't. I wouldn't go out and look for a house unless I knew what I could pre-qualify for.
Exactly. Or you wouldn't call a contractor to your house and
Right.
say,
Start
tell
putting a
me,
pool down unless I knew what it
you
was
tell
for.
me how much it will be to make this
Right.
house look like the one from the TV show. That nobody does that. And perhaps we as a subcommittee, or we as a committee, the larger committee, needs to come up with a number. If we're not given a number, we're going to have to establish a number and then work from there, because otherwise we're going to be focusing a lot of energy into options that are just simple non-starters, and we're going to have to use our gut feeling. We're going to have to use conversations with council members or whatever information we have to come up with that number. But I think there needs to be a budget, and either given or assumed, there needs to be a budget.
Chuck, have you run into this problems in other projects that you've run? Is that a crazy question?
I think probably in different forms. I think every district's probably unique in what their needs and solutions are. Yeah, I could definitely see the logic in going, what can we afford? But if I play devil's advocate in a town councilor, it's like being the car salesman and you come onto the lot, you go, what's your budget for a car? And they're going to try to maximize your budget, right? So they're going to back into a car they can sell you. So, and all due respect to the town councilors, they're probably saying, tell us what you feel we need, and we'll tell you if we can afford it. If I'm buying a car, I'm going to say what I want, then you tell me what the price is, and then we'll figure it out. Not vice versa. So just playing that analogy a little bit, if you believe in that. But I think, being in the meeting last week, and all due respect to Matt and Kate and others who seem to supported a high school option, whether reno or new going first. If we stick to the data, which is overwhelmingly in telling us that you need more space in your elementary schools, that option does not support that need from what we feel is a data-driven situation. Will it, I think Kate had mentioned, it'll become a draw for the town. Well, maybe it will, but it still doesn't solve your elementary school problem. So in addition to having let's just call it $170 million project of a high school, plus or minus, just for round figures, we're hearing that's a showstopper, right? So, okay, town council saying that's too big of a number in itself. But one thing I was talking within the team is high schools are nice and they're the biggest facility. However, a lot of families that may be moving into Cheshire within Connecticut, outside of Connecticut, different story. If they got job relocation, hey, that is what it is. But I don't think most families are relocating once their kids are at the high school level. They're going to stay where they're at because their kids are with their friends, right? New families are going to be attracted to your district. I would think are going to be attracted. They're young families coming out of New Haven, Meriden, Hartford, wherever, coming with a new family, younger family, and want to be in a more rural environment versus urban. So is that high school as attractive to them at that point? This is going to be 10 or so years down the road. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I think they're going to be looking more towards elementary schools because it's so vital to have that elementary education early and have that quality education. So I'm just throwing that out there for thought. But the fact is, and I think this is fact, it could be proven wrong, that you have needs in your elementary school, not your high school. If you don't address the high school, it's still going to operate. You're still going to maintain it. You're still going to run it, and you have room for kids. You're going to run out of room in these elementary schools based upon the data we're seeing. So to throw anything other than an option to solve that problem first, I think that box needs to, from a consultant side, should be checked and go, yeah, that's the number one priority. But that's just from what we're seeing. We don't make the decision, of course. Now, with respect to, and I've been taking these notes and kind of writing some down, the high school is the big elephant. There's a big dollar value there, whether it's now or later. And how we tackle that doesn't sound like it's right now. Eventually, you're going to have to. So if you start talking about our other two options, and we'll talk about the fifth in a moment that Kate brought up, which I think is certainly valid. I think we need to start, and I think, Renee, you mentioned it, developing a matrix of factors, whether it be fiscal responsibility, the cost, addressing programmatic or I'll say enrollment needs, addressing physical plant needs for conditions, and other factors that are important to the town of Cheshire. Start developing that matrix and filling that matrix out and seeing where these options fall relative to one another as far as priority goes. And there's a lot of ways, obviously, we can develop that matrix, but for your committee as a whole to start filling these matrices out and going, hey, we looked at all the factors, and it comes down to which one provides the best value. And what that value is totally up to you in your town. But having a matrix to show and really plot it out, I think, is going to lead us to the direction you need to go, at least for this first option. With that said, we can assist with that and kind of kickstart it and make some recommendations, and you can change them and switch them around and define those whatever way you like. I think the middle school option, in addition to, okay, providing a school that benefits all the kids, at least from the elementary school up and through, if it's right-sized to reduce or eliminate the need for additions in your elementary schools, that's going to buy you time in the schools to do those either capital improvement projects, miscellaneous, your repairs as you go. And so that time factor, that the amount of the money you're spending, yes, it's more, but you have more time to address over a period of time your elementary schools. Now, is that ideal? We can argue that probably both ways. The other option of the new elementary school is that you're paying less money, but you're probably still going to have to do something to the remaining elementary schools. And how much is that? That's again subjective. If we're talking about renovating schools, on average, you're probably talking anywhere from 35 to 50 million per school on a renovation. That means bringing it to a like new, renovate like new, all new systems, all new mechanicals.
Right, because if we want to get incentive money, it needs to be renovated like new. It cannot be Band-Aids.
Yeah, you can do alterations, but your ineligible costs are higher, definitely, right. Renee. And so that's where you go, okay, well, our costs are going to go up in alteration to spend another 10 million. We're going to spend and I'm throwing that number up. We'll probably have to bond the same amount at the end of the day to get this fully renovated. But for schools of these sizes, and I know Highland's bigger and they'll range, but we're just looking at a school. We just did a budget in Newington, 66,000, John? That's $35.5 million in today's budget. That just to give you a sense of what it would take to renovate that school. As you go up, you're talking about $5 to $5.50 per square foot, on top of that for every square foot beyond. So, a Highland to renovate, I'd have to look at the numbers, but you could be in the 60 million. So multiply average, say 50, say 40 million per school on average, you're another 160 million for the four. So now on top of that, you're still in a 200,000 range, and I'm throwing out large numbers. So anybody who's watching this, please take it with a grain of salt. I'm not doing hard numbers here because I know we're videotaping, but just trying to show the context of an elementary school first. You still have to touch the elementary schools remaining most likely, and if you renovate them, that's more dollars. If you CIP them and do minor improvements, well, obviously that figure is going to be less.
But you don't get reimbursement.
Maybe you get like roof replacements, window replacements, code upgrades, not even close compared to a renovation project,
right?
By any means.
So the town doesn't get the same bang for its buck.
I think that's safe to say. I think that's a fair assessment for that. And if you're gonna go in there and you're gonna disrupt school activities, renovate the thing, bring it to a like new, where you're gonna get better renovation, you're gonna get full facilities upgraded, and you got to go case by case. It's easy to say, hey, right, just renovate the whole thing. We still have to evaluate it, but I think that's not too far off, Renee.
Right. So here are two takeaways I have out of this discussion. One is we need to find a way to come to a consensus on a budget, whether that is given or assumed. So I'm gonna talk to the leadership of the committee and see how we can push for that. The second one is we need to develop a little bit more the long-term plan of the options and how they compare with each other. So I think Chuck, that's something that you can help us with.
Yep.
Kickstart the development of these matrices. And did I say that right?
Sounds about right.
We understood.
Kickstart that development. And also, I think we need to look at a couple steps ahead of these first options. I think there's a lot of people focusing on whether we start with an elementary school or whether we start with the high school. That doesn't mean that the elementary schools are forgotten or that the high school is forgotten. It's that they come at a different point in the plan. So I think that we need to look at the whole 10-year plan and how the different options play with each other. Then I think if we could nail down these two things, we'll come better armed for the next committee meeting, and we can try to hone in the group to a smaller subset of options. Balancing 5 options, I think is too much to chew on for our group at this point.
Renee, can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely, John.
I'm happy to play the role of Jim Jascott, if it helps at all. And I think we presented this before, but just there was some conversation earlier about sort of scale of taxpayer impact. And I think what I'm hearing, obviously in addition to project size, is really what is affordable is I think the key word, and what is that taxpayer impact?
Right.
I can put on the screen here, and again, this is a pretty simplistic way to look at it, but this is kind of assuming one bond issuance period rather than the multiple tranches we would most likely do for a larger project. But just to kind of bookend a little bit the impact, if you look at $100 million project, right, with a 35% reimbursement, so that's a $65 million borrow. If you throw that in an amortization schedule, you end up with an average taxpayer impact, an annual impact of $388.
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years. So again, it would probably be a little less than that if we did different tranches and depending on the cash flow.
Right.
But I can certainly, if folks were looking at $75 million project and a $48 million borrow, that's about $291 a year. So just, I don't know if there's any other numbers you want me to put in, or if that's just kind of to start that conversation, but we can, and I can certainly have Jim present maybe more detailed analysis, but I think I don't know how detailed it really needs to be at this stage, other than a general conversation about what does affordability mean to those that have to get comfortable with that affordability in order to pass it. So,
Right.
I had thrown into the chat the questions Groton used. So they do a phone survey asking people, if the district were to create a brand new middle school and the cost was, $40 a month, would you support that? So you get a, very objective, where does the community stand on this topic? And I don't know if they would or they wouldn't. But I get, it sounds like, that's a question that the question of even asking is one for the town council. And I think, it's almost a disservice to the council members to not know and still try and plan this.
Jeff, to respond to that, I appreciate that questionnaire, and I think that is a topic that the council should consider. And Sean, I appreciate your your general numbers, and I think that's what would be helpful to the committee, but recognizing that your $100 million project would add $388 over 20 years. In addition to that, there are other projects that come up in the town that we bond, which, or as we do every budget every year, we increase the taxes. We try not to, but they increase a little bit every year. So there will be some increases just in the general management of the town, in addition to that $388, which is only for this one project. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, yes. I mean, I think with debt and the debt service line, obviously we have projects that are falling off every couple of years, and the size to which they're falling off in comparison to those we're adding on. Obviously, you can do that without increasing taxes if you're only replacing debt for debt, so to speak, on the other projects unrelated to the schools. You know, and I think Andrew mentioned earlier, it clearly comes down to prioritization. Everything on our 5-year plan, you know, would need to be held up in comparison to any project that the council, if recommended by the SMC, you know, move the project forward. And then, yeah, I mean, certainly our long range budget assumptions do have built-in expenditure increases. We have had a lot of success recently with some economic development projects, and you know, I think time will tell if we're able to keep up the success we had last year with the grand list growth being twice the normal year. If we could keep that up, you may be able to accommodate more of this within, with less of a taxpayer impact.
Okay, so that this, but there's a lot of factors that it isn't just a raw 388. It could change based on what larger projects we have. I don't remember, are we almost paid off with our sewer treatment plant? Is that one going away? I've forgotten where we are on that, but yeah, would
That's
make a
not-
difference.
yeah, that one only just came on, so.
Okay, so we've got that to go for a long time.
John, what is that? That was a 30?
40 something, wasn't it? 42?
Borrowing is 20 million. Oh, the actual dollars amount I thought was,
Or what's the borrowing? Like,
I have it here, 30.
30 something, 39, 37. I don't remember.
There were 2 tranches, but they, there we go. I don't have it at my fingertips.
it's okay.
I'll
It's
pull it
okay.
up.
Not important.
But that's how the council will justify saying, okay, we're adding that, but we're retiring some of this other debt, and we've chosen not to proceed with some of the other projects that we are considering. So it isn't like we're trying to raise your taxes $1,000 a year, basically. That's just a general sense I have. Chuck, if you were to think that we had $100 million budget, can you, and we have 4 projects of schools to renovate at 40 million apiece at a cost to the town of what? What's the 90 million? That would be in the $100 million price range, right? That would be just to renovate the 4 schools. That would not be building a new middle school or renovating the middle school. Am I correct in my math?
If you're renovating, we'd have to, the challenge of not, I'll say, building a new middle school or new elementary school. The way I see the data is you have to construct additional square footage.
Okay.
You have to provide additional square footage somewhere.
I get that, but
Right.
I'm just trying to say we choose an option, and that would be the middle school, and we know that's going to cost us X number of dollars.
Gotcha. Yep.
Then we need to address the next 4 schools and figure out, and at $40 million a school average renovation budget, that adds another 160, but less our reimbursement. What does that add? Another $100 million to the project?
Yeah, let's just say 160 times, it's what, 45 then, I think is the reimbursement. Let's say 0.43 effective just because of ineligible costs. That'd be another 70 million, bonded plus or minus in that range.
Okay, so just as we talking general figures. So we figure we have 70 million to fix all 4 elementary schools like new. And we have how much to do a new middle school? Cost
Um,
to us, cost to
we-
us.
Cost to UIS, on average, about 83 million.
Okay,
71 to 91 million on a range of, say, 83 million.
all right. So
You're-
then that added together is 160 million
Yeah,
for all 4 schools to be renovated by new and a new middle school, correct? At
yeah,
cost
and we can
plus.
certainly confirm that pretty quickly and run the numbers, based upon the square footages and stuff like that. We can confirm that.
But even if we gave a general number like that, it gives some perspective as to what it would cost to do, not necessarily presenting that as the end all be all project, but that's a general thing we have to look at as far as cost is concerned. And the difference would be if we Band-Aid the schools, we're spending a little bit less, but we're not getting renovated as new and we're not getting a better quality
Right.
job. And how much
We'll be
less
back.
would that be? I mean,
We'll be back here in 5 years approving more money.
right.
Yeah, and maybe we do, what I was thinking is, okay, let's take a 2A where we go new middle school, right? And 2As to renovate the remaining elementary schools, assuming minimal. We're waiting for Malone to get us the revised numbers, but minimal additions, maybe small ones, but for the most part as is, do that option, and then go, okay, let's assume, say $15 million in CIP,
Okay.
right? Maybe, and I'm just using that as an arbitrary number of capital improvement projects per
Mhm.
school. And then we say, okay, what's the reimbursement of that? Probably, I'm guessing what, been maybe 20% if we're lucky, roofs, maybe windows, and I'm just trying to put a figure out there of, but then you go that matrix, okay, what are we getting? Band-Aid fixes, if we're saying 15 million times 4, 60 million, you might get reimbursed 10 million. You're gonna spend $50 million of your own money to really, and I'm doing these numbers fast, so
Yeah,
I hope
right,
you
but-
quote me on these, but
that's what,
you're spending $50 million to make alterations where we just did the calculation of what, $70 million to renovate them all, if those numbers were accurate. So I think we had to do that comparison, do the numbers on renovating them, and go, here's what your borrowed costs would be in a 2A versus a 2B option, and then assume a CIP. We don't, without going in depth and looking at everything, I think we can safely assume a certain amount average per school, and then go, most of it's not going to be eligible. So instead of 35%, 45%, we're going to get maybe 20%, and I'm just kind of very high level ballpark, and then go, okay, for another 20 million more, we can borrow money, we can renovate these schools, or 30, whatever the case may be. That would give some good, I think, the context that you may be looking for to go, what are we talking about here? It's like fixing that old car where you're gonna spend $3,000 for new transmission, versus, hey, I'm gonna go buy a new used car for $12,000 and I'm gonna get that many more years and less maintenance. It's obviously subjective, but we could do that exercise relatively quickly, at least to give us a little bit better picture of what that impact would be. And then we can also do it for the option 1 and go, okay, build a new middle school, and then go, okay, if, with certain assumptions, and go, okay, we're going to make renovations, alterations to those. Caveat being, okay, there's some room for expansion, there's just not a lot on these sites. We have to get creative. So maybe we can maybe go those options and evaluate them and go, what's the cost to the town? And then again, the high school's at the end, right? I think on those 2 options, the high school's still at the end. And I think, frankly, once you get through these, or do you address the high school before you address the remaining elementary schools? If you have enough room with say a middle school option and we don't have to add on, that leaves it up in the air of which ones do you touch first, the elementary school or the high school at that point. And I'm kind of spitballing ideas as we go here, so.
Chuck, can you talk, to the group for 1 second about one thing? So if we do alterations to the buildings, what we're talking about is essentially repairs, installing a new roof, you know,
Yep.
windows. And when you're
Eligible.
done, it's going to look like you didn't do anything. People are not going to walk into the building and say, oh, this is a renovated school. But when you do a renovation, it's more comprehensive, where you may be changing layout inside the building. But the more important thing is you're adding new furniture, new fixtures, new equipment, right? Isn't that?
Well, new mechanicals, you're talking new electrical service, new mechanicals, which frankly, with the current situation, indoor air quality is at very top of the list. New security, you know, like you said, 21st century learning. That's what a renovation project gets you, is reprogramming the building with certain restrictions, right? We have a physical constraint of the existing building we work with, but with the talent that's out there with these architectural firms, it's amazing what they do to make these work. And you know, you see the before and after, like, wow, these things they're like night and day. But yes, I agree with you, Ben. You're doing CIP. It's really Band-Aid fixes. You might do a new roof. Okay, I got another 20-year warranty on their roof. Okay, but I still got old rooftop units, unserviceable switchgear equipment, you know, non-air conditioned spaces, technology, you know, your switches and so forth. Yeah, it's very school to school. So,
But you're not touching the inside of the classroom, where with the renovation, you will have new furniture. It'll be consistent throughout the building, and that's going to change the look and feel of the school. I know you talk about it as programming, but you know, really when it comes down to it,
it's a new
what
learning
looks like
environment.
classroom, and that's important, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's a modernization as
Right.
opposed to maintenance work.
There's improvements, then there's maintenance. You know, maintenance is maintaining as far as, you know, I like to, you know, kind of put is you're really not improving your space. You're just keeping the lights on, keeping the heat on, keeping it comfortable and safe, versus improving that learning environment for your staff and your students, and making it a more enjoyable, you know, introducing more light, you know, and kids, they learn I'm told they learn better. More, we work better in comfortable spaces,
Yeah.
right? Kids are going to learn better in more comfortable spaces with better technology, better furniture. You know, the teachers are going to appreciate it. They're going to be happier. I think there's a lot of downhill effects of of those. And also it goes back to, you start deferring some of these things after a certain amount of time. Like, you know, I look at like I think you're referring to, Renee, you know, our house, like, okay, you know, we buy a house at a certain point, we have a budget, but over the years, we want to redo the kitchen, upgrade the master bedroom, you know, replace the roof. Very few of us can do that all at once. Move out of the house and have somebody totally renovate. So they have to plan it out over time, to do it. So we could do those different scenarios for you.
I think, we have another meeting next week. I will try to have some conversations in the next couple of days with Chuck and Jen, and see if we can reach out to the town council to see if we can get some more definition. But I think, I think the next committee meeting is middle of December, the 13th, I believe.
7th?
Is it the 7th?
Yeah, the 7th,
and
actually,
the
Renee.
13th, Yeah.
Right.
7th and the 16th are.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So I think there needs to be a dedicated section of that meeting just to hone in on the options and try to pick at least two that we could focus on, and try to weed out some others that don't meet certain criteria. So I would definitely put that matrix on top of the list, and I'll try to get a definition of the budget on top of the list as well. Sylvia and Andrew, I'm not sure what else you would put on that list, but I would like to focus on 2 or 3 to try to drive a decision.
How about the option 5, Renee? Kate brought up the possibility of an option 5 is really just a maintenance program. I don't want to dismiss it or, not, address it in this group, because she mentioned, if we don't do anything, what is the cost to do that? It's certainly a valid point. Not sure if that's an option, but she did bring it up, so I just thought I'd just remind you guys of that. So
That doesn't that just go to your capital improvement scenario where we identify what it would be to just maintain them for the next how many ever years, and as opposed to renovating as new, as what we discussed. That option seems to be the simplest way for people to understand without getting in the weeds of all the finances. Here's what it's going to cost us if we renovate as new. Here is what it's going to cost us if we simply maintain things and Band-Aid everything and not change, as Vince said, the interior or anything, just keep the schools but fixed. And if we do a middle school, it will cost this. And if we add to that project, it's going to cost a total of this. And remember that each time we go to referendum for each one of those projects, we're not bonding the whole 160 million or 100 million or 75 million or whatever it is all at once. We're doing each one in stages so that the increase in taxes will be a gradual increase in taxes, because you're bonding the first project, and then at some point in time at the completion of, or during which we would bond the next piece. And so eventually the whole thing would be being bonded for 160 million, because we'd still be paying on the first one, but each step would gradually increase the taxes slowly, not all at once.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being too simplistic about it, but that's kind of the way I figured it out. Does that make sense, or am I missing something?
Well, the only reason I bring it up, Sylvia, is we had some experience in Madison with this. We went forth with a referendum for a new elementary school to replace one. And then eventually it was to renovate one and take one offline. What we found there was that, and they still haven't moved forward yet, is we didn't have what the cost was to do basically nothing. And afterwards we went forth and we put together a 10-year, a seriously detailed capital improvement plan for the schools, identifying if there's new mechanicals, new electricals. I mean, it's pretty extensive list, pretty in-depth matrix that I'd be willing to share with you guys, but that ended up being $100 million. And so when they were comparing, they're saying, okay, when we did the whole plan, we said the new school is going to be like 37, and then the next school to renovate would be, I think, another 32. So it was like 69 to 70 million to renovate these two elements, but build new and renovate. And they had no context of what was the alternative. Well, the alternative was in reality about $130 million versus doing these, and I'm throwing out the numbers. I'd have to revisit them, but seeing the true picture, which is going to be more than over the next 5 years, 25 million. I think that number is going to be more. And, the one that Vin carries is, hey, that's for budgeting purposes. But if you study the schools and you dive into them and you go, man, it's really going to need this to bring it up, keep the roof from leaking, get the windows to be more energy efficient. They're subjective on that. It's something to compare to, kind of like we were talking before. So.
Yeah, I agree that not being thorough on the needs could skew that number. So also not factoring in what the objectives are for the schools could skew that number. And by objectives, I mean air quality or educational objectives and all that, because it's not a 1-for-1. I was just thinking in my head, well, if a new school is 100 million, you could technically say that you will probably spend 20 to 30% more doing it in pieces, and that then you're not going to get all the reimbursement. So that's one way of looking at it. But I mean, I'm oversimplifying it. I'm not sure if without figuring out what the capital improvements for each building without a big project like this. That sounds like a project in and of itself.
It kind of is, Renee, and I just didn't want to dismiss what Kate had brought up or forget about her comment, in the meeting.
Right, and I agree with that, but this is a school modernization committee, so I don't think, and we need to review what our charter is, but I don't think it is not to do anything. I think the town recognizes that something needs to be done with the schools, and
Okay.
we recognize it from our visits. And I don't want to dismiss it either, but I think I know what Kate's trying to say. She wants to use it as a tool to show what the alternative is, right? But I'm not sure that with the information we have, we'll be able to picture that accurately in a way that it's not going to have a bunch of holes in it.
I agree with that. We don't have all that information to do that within a reasonable level of confidence.
Right.
Renee, excuse me, you had mentioned you had two objectives there with Chuck and Jen. Can I possibly suggest another objective as far as discussing the survey scenario with them? Because essentially this is a catch-22 where we can't proceed without knowing what the amount is that we have to work with, and vice versa. So I think the survey may alleviate some of the concerns or fears with some of the people as to what the town may be, willing to accept. And then based on that, I think that leads us or directs us as to what we can work against. And therefore, that gives us that bottom line that we can say, this is what we can or can't do.
Yeah, John, and I think that's a great point. And I think that actually ties back into the budget. I think we have three options for the budget. One, the town council tells us what the budget is. And we've been trying to get that information for a year now, and I guess it's not that clear. Two, the committee, based on what we've heard, seen, feel, assumes a budget. That's a little riskier on the committee side. Or three, we do some type of survey and we let the people tell us.
Right.
So those, I'm not sure if there's a fourth option, but those
I
seem
don't
to
think
be the
there's
ones.
a fourth option, but I just want to add to the positivity of that. Look at what's happened with our survey and the job we did to determine the residents' opinion about what to do with the Chapman property. We sent out surveys and there was a lot of response to that. And that really guided the consultants to come up with a project that met the needs, and they had matrices. What was that, Renee? Matrices.
Matrices. I think it's matrix. I'm going to Google that right now.
But they had that checked off all the boxes. Do you want a bathroom? Do you want a nice this? And now they've got a project and there's a cost associated with that. And now we can look at it and say, okay, we don't want to spend that much money. So how do we need to adjust that to accommodate the budget dollars that we have? So that was a very successful process that was undertaken. Now, Chuck, is that something that I don't remember who developed that survey for them to do that, whether it was the consultant who had the survey or we did, but I mean, is that a simple?
I think it's a combined process there. So I think it's a professional survey firm. And my guess, and they'll probably meet with leadership and go, okay, what are the goals of this? And they're experts in crafting that question to be fairly, answered, like you were alluding to. So it's not
because I think
skewed
and those can be skewed if you're not careful. So you need to be, but I would be in favor of a survey option to see take the temperature of the town.
Right, and there's a couple of factual pieces of information that I'd like to see. I don't know who could produce them, but I know for Vin, can you is it possible to put together what we've spent on capital improvement projects in the schools in the past 20 years? The only reason why I'm saying that is because as we sit here today, right now, they have a 5-year plan that I know from the planning committee that is $25 million worth of work in the schools. So if you look at that, so in 20 years, which will be the bond for a new middle school, if we're continuing to spend $25 million every 5 years in CIP projects, that's our $100 million right there. So if we're not doing that and we're investing that money into, because all this money is coming from the taxpayers regardless, it's all bonded funding. So we would actually probably be doing better if we were going to be taking out a larger amount because we get the state reimbursement. Am I correct in that, Vin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that needs to be part of the discussion. Then secondly, I think we need the town to show us what bonding of long-term projects is falling off and how each year our debt service is going to be and where that's going to be. Because I mean, I know that the major overhaul that was done 20 years ago of Cheshire High School, Dodd Middle School, and some other work at the elementary schools, that was 20 years ago this year. So that was a large expenditure. So that has to be falling off. And so, I mean, like those, I think, are important pieces of the puzzle for the average taxpayer to see, and for the committee in general to see what money is really there. And there might be a large savings in not spending all this money year after year on CIP projects in the schools and put it towards the debt service of the town for the bond issuance.
Yeah. Does that information is easily accessible, Vin?
Well, I have it actually, that as we're talking here, I'm just pulling up my budget presentation. I'm trying to find it so I could share it on the screen. But yeah, I mean, I certainly have it going back to 2009. And I could show you two different things, you know, and as this discussion continues, I can pull it up. Sean, can I share? I'm going to try sharing screen again, which I had trouble
Yeah,
last night.
It's enabled for all
Mhm.
participants, it says, so hopefully.
Go right to the bottom.
Yep. It gives me this message, open system preferences.
Do you want to email it to me? I can throw it on the screen.
Yep. All right, give me a couple of seconds. Talk amongst yourselves.
How's the weather gonna be tomorrow?
What are you looking forward to eating most? What's your favorite thing on Thanksgiving? Not turkey for sure, but what else? How many people really like turkey? You do. Good. Okay.
Sure.
Fried. I like fried turkey.
Okay.
Oh.
We like turkey sandwiches better than the turkey dinner.
Day after, day after.
Day after.
Or 8 o'clock at night after
Yeah,
the
or 8 o'clock
game.
So sweet potatoes with marshmallows or without marshmallows?
Without marshmallows, but with apples. Right.
Oh, all right.
Oh, much better. Yeah.
Native apples, like Cheshire apples. Sylvia?
Cheshire apple.
Oh, there you go.
Already made, right?
So we're waiting for that, Renee. So John, what we'll do is let's develop a couple, work up some options for, you know, like a 1A and 1B with, you know, including renovation of, you know, the elementary schools with some assumed additions and certain ones with a range. And then we'll do one with alterations with an assumed budget. Of course, not having, you know, a detailed scope, but at least some assumptions. And then what we can do is develop a district share. Okay, what's that number going to be to the district with some assumed ineligibles, et cetera. At least give us some better context to those. We could do that for next week.
Okay.
And then let's start developing a matrix of criteria that we think would be important to Cheshire, and then subject to, you know, you guys, you know, the committee modifying those or adding to those as well.
All right, Sean, I sent it over, but everything's on a 30-second delay. So when you get it, it's slide 13 in that PowerPoint presentation.
It hasn't come yet, but I'll let you know.
Okay.
So, I mean, generally, Vin, is it every 5 years, 25 million, or is that kind of a?
You know, well, I'll explain what I do. So what I look at every year is how much do we request on the 5-year capital plan? And, you know, I'm just eyeballing it. 2009 was 13 million, but by the time we got to 2018, it was a $26 million request. So that's the whole 5-year plan. 19 million of 26 million was approved in the 5-year plan in 2018. So the council approves about, in that year, they approved about 73% of the 5-year plan. If you look at it over our, 10-year period, we've requested, 200 million. The council approved 174 million in the 5-year plan, but that's not what's funded. Okay, and when you see these slides, it'll make more sense. What I then do is I say, well, what is the 1-year request? So we have a 5-year plan, but we're only asking for funding in 1 year. And so the actual funding has averaged about 3 million. The funding request has averaged about 3 million per year. And the council over the last decade or so, when this was done, approved about 1.8 million per year. So there's a big gap between the 5-year plan and what's
What gets funded.
actually funded. And the reason for that is we, keep taking our 5-year plan and kind of pushing the larger projects that were in year 5. It's now should be year 4. We push it back to year 5 because over the last, 7 years or so, we've been, looking at and talking about what are the improvement plans long-term. So, I would say in the last 3 years or so, the capital budget request for 5 years has been 25 million, but we're not funding that. And we just keep pushing these projects off and off and off. We've never looked at in our 5-year plan, what is the comprehensive need for all the schools to get them, even from a facilities point of view, where they need to be, because we've been deferring that to a facility master plan or a school modernization plan.
Okay.
Would it be fair to take either the last 5 years or maybe 10 years, and these are identified needs really, right? Then the capital, the 5-year plan is identifying needs or potential needs that you'll need, not necessarily what you funded, and go, okay, over the last 5 years, we've averaged for a 5-year plan, looks like close to $4 million, $3.5 to $4 million thereabouts, or 5 million, yeah, $3 to $4 million. And if we were to, escalate that out over the next 20 years, and that's on the low side, right? You take it at say 3%, whatever you want to use for escalation, and compound that over the next 20 years, amongst your schools, it kind of gives you a context of what you're probably looking at if you don't defer anything.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly do that workup. I know Sean was just sharing the screen there. Sean, can you just bring that up again one more time? I'm sorry. Because I at least want to give everybody a bird's eye view. So this is the last year. This was the 2018-19 through 22-23 capital year. So this is what I could get my hands on quickly. You could see by year, this is what the Board of Ed requested for each of those years' 5-year plans, the council's approval. So over this 10-year period, the council approved 86% of the 5-year capital plan. And so that's what went in the town's overall debt plan. Sean, if you go to the next slide.
So
58%.
Right. So this is the funding rate. So these are the amounts we requested. To your point, Chuck, these are the things we need, whether it's roofs, whether it's, in here we did a running track, windows, some outdoor projects, things that you have to keep the schools maintained for the most part. So over this period of time, as I said, the average per year, we asked for funding of 3.1 million. The council approved 1.8 million. So the actual funding rate approval was 58%. And you could see that, in some years, the dollar amount was very low because we were getting pretty close to, the facility master plan in this particular year. So we kept the request.
Pulled it back.
yeah.
But eventually, the one thing that I don't think is being told here is eventually these projects that didn't get funded are going to catch up with you at some point or another. Right. That delta of, roughly 30%, 28%, maybe a little less in reality, to say 20%, eventually you're gonna have to pay the piper to take care of those issues one way or another, you know?
What I'm struggling to see is how do you allocate these costs to a specific building that you renovate? I think that will be hard to do because I think that's what we're trying to get to, right? How much of these can we claim as savings? Um, I think because even if we, let's say, build a new middle school, you will still be spending capital on maintaining, the remaining buildings. So I guess if you take an average requested of $3 million per year, and those are the real needs, right? And you divide that by the square foot of all the facilities, maybe you can allocate something to a new building. I don't know. I'm struggling to see how we can claim savings out of this, knowing that our plan is going to start very small. And
Well,
then
the only savings you're gonna find is if you demolish a building. Like we say Humiston, okay, we're gonna take it offline and move you. Well, unless you sell it or demolish it, you still gotta
Right.
heat it, you still gotta maintain it.
Right.
You know, your percentage of savings really isn't that great, and I think there's a false sense of, oh, we take it offline, well, like Darcy. Well, if you demolish it for $1.5 million, well, then you gotta take that off of however long we would take. So yeah.
But there is, I'll tell you what there is a capital avoidance. So in our 5-year plan, let's say that we were gonna take Dodd and build a new middle school. In our capital budget, and I do have this broken down by school, this is just a top level one. If we have $2.5 million allocated in our 5-year capital plan to just do the normal, maintenance for Dodd, if you're building a new Dodd, so you have that cost avoidance of $2.5 million. Of course, you're going to have a carrying cost for Dodd that continues on, right? So you may not be investing additional capital dollars if the assumption is you're going to sell Dodd, but until you sell Dodd as a building, you still have a carrying cost. All analysis, that we could do, I mean, all we have to do is pick what's the scenario, and then we could do the analysis on it. But what it's not going to do is it's not going to get us to a net zero. You're not going to build a new building and have savings that offset the cost. I mean, I'm exaggerating the reality, but there's savings, but it's not going to be a monumental savings that will dramatically impact the overall net cost of the project. It'll help.
Right. I don't know if we take that as gravy or if that is an amount that is actually going to be factoring the financials, if it's worth factoring in. I'm not sure. So I think we have a path for our next meeting. I'll circle back with different team members in the next couple of days and sticking to the objectives of this subcommittee of focusing on the right options. Let's try to work towards that. I think that the discussion today was helpful in the sense that I think we're all on the same page that there's certain realities that we need to contend with and that we need to keep our focus. So Sylvia and Andrew, do you want to add anything else to today's discussion?
I am good.
I think it was very productive, and I think we need to stay focused. And I look forward to seeing the results of some of these further reach outs that you're going to make to committee chair and Chuck and so on and so forth. But I think we all basically agree what the situation is, and looks like we have a good path to get there.
Chuck, do you have anything to add, or John, from a Collier standpoint?
No, I mean, from my standpoint, I think we've identified, I think we have a short amount of time though to get to January 21, right? We're only 2 months away. It's going to creep up on us quick. We're going to lose some time on the holidays. I think it's important just to acknowledge it. I think we talked about that earlier this week a little bit.
Mhm.
you know, with Chuck and Jen and Jeff and Vin, and we we're
Mhm.
just, you know, at a high level, I'm like, there's a lot of work, and you know, hopefully my fingers crossed, the committee can, with help from the town council, we can get to a consensus, but it's just a certain amount of time it takes to get to that consensus and to feel comfortable with your scenario. And we'll do everything we can to give you as much information to make that
Yep.
decision, for next, we're working on stuff for next week. I don't know if you have anything else, John.
No, I was just gonna say, to your point earlier, Renee, we have too many balls, I think, up in the air, and we need to, put some of the balls down and concentrate on one or two ultimately, but, trying to get to that point, I think there are a couple of steps and procedures that we need to, still go through to get to that point, but I think we'll get there, but, hopefully, the time constraint is gonna be a challenge, the end of January, but, we'll do our best and hopefully we can get there and have everybody on the same page.
Excellent.
Good.
Jeff and Vin, you have anything to add today?
No,
Hey.
I'm good.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I just want to reiterate, and I think there's good progress. I think there's real value in trying to assess what the community thinks is what the fiscal tolerance is. I mean, otherwise, modernization and the council are just taking shots in the dark.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to taking a deeper look at that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Arnett, do you have any additional comments for today?
No, other than I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.
Likewise, happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
indeed.
So with that, I will call to adjourn.
I move adjourn.
Oop, second.
Excellent. Well, everybody have a very happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe out there and talk to you next Wednesday.
Now get
All right,
home.
be
guys.
good. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.